issued their first advisory on potential tropical cyclone 8, which is just off the South Carolina coast now. It is expected to become a tropical storm before it makes landfall in South Carolina tomorrow. What does that mean? Well, I'll tell you about it in a few minutes on a special edition Sunday evening. Good Sunday evening. I'm meteorologist Frank Strait, Carolina Weather Group panelist here to talk about a storm that's going to be affecting us over the next few days here in the Carolinas. This being a potential tropical cyclone 8, with the first advisory for that just issued a short while ago at 5 p.m. By the National Hurricane Center. Let's go ahead and get my screen shared so we can show y'all what's actually going to be coming our way. So let's get this going, and here we go. And there is a close-up satellite view of potential tropical cyclone 8. We've been watching this spin around out here since yesterday, and it's starting to gain some tropical characteristics out here. Thunderstorms are clustered near the center. You can see signs of a rotation even in the thunderstorms. That's starting to happen, but if you look at the lower clouds up here, you can see them indicative of a northeast wind up here, moving from northeast to southwest, and then into evidence of a west wind down here as these lower clouds just south of the cirrus are moving from west to east. But even if we didn't have those indications, the hurricane hunters have been flying around out there for much of the afternoon, and they have found that there is a circulation there. It's not quite tight enough to be classified as a tropical cyclone just yet, but it's not far from it, and it is forecast to become a tropical cyclone before it makes landfall in South Carolina, along the South Carolina coast tomorrow. So let's look at the first advisory graphic on potential tropical cyclone 8. And that shows the position there at 5 p.m., 120 or so miles southeast of Georgetown, South Carolina. And the track takes it to the northwest, making landfall close to the Charleston and Georgetown County line in South Carolina around 2 p.m. tomorrow, and as a tropical storm at that point. So since it's forecast to become a tropical storm, that means that the next name on the list would be used up, and that next name is Helene. I know if you have any French speakers in the audience, they're probably screaming at me right now. It's pronounced Helene, but that's or Hélène rather, but that's the French pronunciation. We do silly things with French words in English. We'll be calling it Helene here since we speak English, but nonetheless, that's tracking northwestward through South Carolina and into North Carolina before slowing down and perhaps even stalling on Wednesday over North Carolina and Virginia and maybe West Virginia. This graphic also shows the tropical cyclone or tropical storm warnings that were issued with Advisory 1, and this is the experimental new graphic that shows the inland tropical storm warnings in effect. So tropical storm warning for the coastal areas starts at Edisto Beach, South Carolina in the south, and goes northeastward along the coast up to Albemarle Sound. Inland areas that are under the warning include Charleston, Berkeley, Georgetown, and Horry counties in South Carolina at this point. Those might get extended a little further inland if the storm gets strong enough, so that's something we'll keep an eye on. So what does that mean in terms of impacts? Well, the main impact is probably going to be rain, so let's look at rainfall first, and this is the Weather Prediction Center rainfall forecast for this storm going for the next 3 days, well, for today, tomorrow, and for Tuesday. So you can see here that we have a large area covered by at least 1 inch of rain, probably 80% of or more of North Carolina, and a large chunk of South Carolina too. The darker green there is where 2 to 4 inches can fall, according to the Weather Prediction Center. The yellow area is 4 to 6 inches, and then 6 to as much as 8 there in a small area just northeast of Wilmington. So that would indicate that some flash flood concerns are there. However, we have been in a drought lately, so the river flood concerns are less. Now, of course, Debbie back in early August brought a complete deluge and some very serious flooding, but the rivers have all receded and have dropped a lot since then because it's been bone dry since Debbie left the area. So drought has begun to expand again in South Carolina, and still covers almost all of western North Carolina, most of the rest of North Carolina in good shape, but some drought areas are present across the west. So because of that, the river flooding concerns are going to be less than you might expect with the tropical storm moving in and causing this much rain. However, there is going to be the risk for flash flooding. And the days 1 to 3 excessive rainfall outlook from Weather Prediction Center bears that out. Of course, the areas that get the greatest amount of rain in the shortest period of time along the Grand Strand and over toward Wilmington and up toward Morehead City. That's likely going to be the main area of concern for flash flooding. But as y'all can see, the slight risk area they have extends well inward, includes Charlotte, Raleigh, Rock Hill, Florence, over to around the Sumter area, as well as our coastal areas. So this is going to be a concern for the next few days, especially Monday into Tuesday, as Helene to be moves northwestward across the Carolinas and then sort of puts an anchor down over Virginia for a while and potentially drifts back southward again later in the week in response to a front moving in from the north. That's surrounded by a little slight risk area as well, with an outside chance of some isolated flash flooding there, extending back to and even in some cases west of the I-26 corridor in South Carolina. So, why is this potential tropical storm Helene to be likely to do what it's doing? Well, if you look at the wide-angle satellite view, of course, there's a potential tropical cyclone 8. A lot of clouds across the southeast associated with an upper-level trough, which the center of that's back here. This trough is, by the way, entrained the remains of Hurricane Francine that made landfall in Louisiana, then moved up into the mid-Mississippi Valley and has drifted southward a little bit since then. The center's not far from Alexandria, Louisiana now. That's going to be drifting slowly eastward in time, and as it does, that steers Helene northward, but eventually it looks like Helene may get captured by this upper trough, and that's the reason why it potentially stalls out with the center somewhere over Virginia, West Virginia, perhaps North Carolina, or far northeast Tennessee for a time. So that could keep the rain going for a while and perhaps a few days of downpours and perhaps some substantial rain over time there in Virginia and North Carolina. So that's what we're dealing with here. And looking at some computer models as well, the GFS from this morning shows the track going northeastward or northwestward rather up into western North Carolina, but then kind of getting stuck there and potentially drifting southward in time as another front moves in, and maybe we get another round of rain at the end of the week here from that front with some tropical moisture entrained in it. GFS shows a lot of rain. The European model shows a similar amount of rain as well, somewhat more widespread, 2 to 4 inch totals actually, and with some higher amounts near the coast. So the model guidance is there for the Weather Prediction Center's forecast. And because some of the models are showing this rain farther south and west, the heavier rain further south and west, it wouldn't surprise me if in the end the Weather Prediction Center extends that forecast or shifts it a little bit more to the southwest. So that's what we're looking at with Helene. Now, if I take a wide-angle view of what's going on down here in the tropics, looking across the rest of the basin, there is one other thing to watch, and that's tropical storm, or rather tropical depression Gordon. It was a tropical storm. That's how it got a name, but it has weakened thanks to wind shear and dry air covering much of this part of the Atlantic Ocean right now. So you can see pretty clearly the circulation centers over here, but there's hardly any thunderstorms associated with it. Wind shear has pushed those thunderstorms off to the east for the most part. Now, Gordon is going to track westward in time, and why don't we jump over and take a look at the forecast for Gordon while we're at it here on the National Hurricane Center's website. That's what the forecast looks like here, remaining a tropical depression for the short term, but if it can survive to Wednesday, it'll turn northeastward and potentially encounter some more favorable conditions and gain a little bit of strength once again. On this track, it's not going to be any concern for us in south of North Carolina unless it gets stronger than forecast and sends some ocean swells our way and causes some beach and boating issues, but that appears unlikely at this point. Going back to the satellite picture here, there's not a whole lot else going on. Another tropical wave here off the African coastline. That's going to take some time to get its act together. So that's the primary concerns that we're dealing with now with potentially Helene by tomorrow. Should probably take a look at the storm surge. That could be a bit of a concern as well. 1 to 3 feet forecast. The question here is going to be whether or not that actually happens at high tide. If it comes at low tide, probably not going to be all that big of a deal. If it happens at high tide, we get moderate to or minor to moderate coastal flooding from that because the astronomical tides are running fairly high. Another thing we're going to have to watch out for some isolated tornadoes in that area. Let's run over to the Storm Prediction Center's website and take a look at their outlook for Monday. Yes, a marginal risk in effect for the coastal plain of North Carolina, the Outer Banks, and a small part of South Carolina due to some isolated tornadoes. And the wind concern as well, again, with potentially a tropical storm moving inland. Much of South Carolina sees 40 to 50 mile an hour winds. And perhaps some higher gusts up as much as 60 miles an hour too. So there you have it. That's what we're looking at for Helene. So if you're living in these areas along our coast, especially in South Carolina, but extending into North Carolina, at least in the coastal areas as well, you have some flooding, wind, and potentially a storm surge to deal with, along with some isolated tornadoes. So get your storm preps going. Ready.gov is a good place to look for storm preps. But if you're in South Carolina, you also have the benefit of the hurricane.sc website that SCEMD has for we South Carolina residents. So that's it. I'm Frank Strait in Columbia, South Carolina. Thanks for joining us here on this special edition of the Carolina Weather Group, and we'll see you again soon. Take care, everyone.